say you want to be part of it, what do you mean then?
I want to be part of the debate. I think our generation, which unfortunately includes you and me, we failed the Western civilization. The political class in Europe that is of my vintage has failed the civilization. Okay, we overpromised, we undertaxed, we created massive deficit spending. Speaking specifically about the United States, the follies in the Middle East were very costly. Right now, to use an American sports analogy, if you'll forgive me, Osama bin Laden is winning the baseball game. It's 6-0, bottom of the 7th inning. We're the home team, and we're down 6-0. Why do I say that? Well, bin Laden wrote on the dark...
I have no idea what that sports analogy means whatsoever, but I don't see how Osama bin Laden actually is winning.
Oh, no, he won big time. Let me tell you how he won. He wrote on the dark web that the U.S. would overreact to our terrorist attacks. They would spend their blood and treasure. They would fight over their civil liberties, the Patriot Act. And we blew a hole in our operating budget. We spent $8 trillion in the Middle East, killed millions of people, tens of thousands of Western soldiers, and we got nowhere. But we've hurt ourselves, and now we're divided, and now we're polarized, and it's led to the rise of populism. Everything that bin Laden predicted that we would do to ourselves to cause a demise of us is happening. He brought down the Soviet Union with our help. He said, now I'm going to turn the gun on you guys, and you'll fight with yourselves and blow yourselves up. And we don't have any transformational leaders that will sit down and say, dudes, we're playing into the hands of our adversaries. We're letting the social media be manipulated by Russia and China. So yeah, I think he is winning.
Osama bin Laden couldn't have seen the advent of Facebook and TikTok and now the new OpenAI Sora.
That he saw the overreaction of the American government to those acts of terror, and which led to, and remember, Bush went to war without a tax cut. It was the first time in our history. I mean, we had a small incident in 1965, but it was a much smaller war. We went to war in the Middle East without a tax cut. Moreover, we cut the taxes in March of 2001, and then he didn't restore the taxes. And it was the first time in our history with the war without a tax increase. And he blew a fiscal hole. It led to the global financial crisis. It led to overborrowing by the Obama administration.
Well, it led to the Taliban eventually retaking Afghanistan too. Right?
Our regime change was going from the Taliban to the Taliban in 20 years and blowing $7 to $8 trillion. But just remember this, okay? George Washington to George W. Bush, $7 trillion. Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, $31 trillion. What the hell are we doing? Okay, what the hell are we actually doing? Okay, and moreover, they got the government shut down now. And so every time they shut down the government and they go to restart it, it's more costly.
All right, so if you're going to be involved in thinking about new Republican leadership post-Donald Trump, how do you want to counteract the impact of social media, the fact that our adversaries are using it extremely effectively to sow division, and the fact that internally MAGA is also divided?
Well, listen, maybe Macron is right. Maybe we gave too much power to the social media companies whose algorithms are set up to make us combative with each other, because when we have the heat, you have more listeners and you get more addiction. And maybe Macron is right that allowing the Russians and the Chinese to influence unduly, or the North Koreans, these social media platforms, maybe there needs to be more regulation of the airwaves, like we regulate, television through the FCC. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I can tell you this, though. There's no short-term answer. I can tell you from my life experience that short-term political situations or short-term political solutions, they don't add up to much. The Chinese, which is still something from their playbook, they think in 10, 20, 30, 50-year units of time. And I don't think there's one problem in the United States that we can't solve with long-term thinking. That includes entitlement spending, the budget, the deficit. It's an unbelievable country. Okay, I believe in the country's ability to adapt and flex itself again.
People always say that about the Chinese, that they plan 100 years. And if you are, I think the last Chinese leader was asked what he thought of the French Revolution, and he said it's too early to tell, right? That's a wonderful kind of example of how they think. But the American political system is not set up like that. The minute a president gets in, he has to start campaigning for his next term. Congress people are there for 2 years. So the minute they get there, all they're thinking about is raising money for their next term. We're not set up, actually, to make long-term decisions.
So this is where it requires entrepreneurial thinking, right? So that's the zero. And what does an entrepreneur have to do? They have to go from 0 to 1. Okay, so if you think like an entrepreneur, you've got to get an entrepreneur into the marketplace to bring in the non-voters. As you and I have talked about on your podcast, there's 100 million people. They vote the exact same way in every single election. A very powerful voting group. It's the non-voter. And what you have to do is you have to go into that market. Because these two cats, the Republicans and the Democrats, they broke the system. Mm-hmm. They created a very tight duopoly after Ross Perot scared them in 1992. They've made it impossible for third parties to enter the system. They trapped each other in their positions through gerrymandering. Okay, they allow each other to gerrymander. They accuse each other of doing it, but they're both doing it. And it ensures the electability of these incumbents. So, said differently, the Congress has a 14% approval rating, slightly above Kim Il-jung, the North Korean dictator, slightly above it. But yet 95% of the incumbents get reelected. This is because of the way they gerrymander those districts. So there is systemic things that have happened that have broken the system, that have now led to this widespread cynicism. But you have to get somebody out there, explain to the American people what happened, explain why Chuck Grassley, who's 600 years older than George Washington, and Nancy Pelosi's 500 years older than Martha Washington, won't leave the Congress. They won't leave. And we had Dianne Feinstein, may her soul rest in peace. They're wheeling her around like she's in an elder care facility because they won't leave because they're addicted to the power, right? And so what you have to do is you have to break that system. So to me, I actually think younger people in their 40s should be taking on these jobs. I'm in my 60s. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to offer advice. I'm happy to help people think about the long-term plan that we need to fix the government. But let's get some younger people in the mix who understand where they want to take the world, okay? And we can fix it, but we're not going to fix it in the current stasis. You're going to need to amend the Constitution and end Citizens United. And for your listeners outside the United States, that's a ridiculous Supreme Court decision rendered in January of 2010 that gives unlimited amounts of money supply into political causes, which has been a disaster for the country because all the legislation has skewed to big business, big pharma, tax cuts for the rich, big wealthy. And they don't give a shit about the average citizen anymore. The big, beautiful spending bill gave a $7,000 benefit if you were making over $1 million a year, and a $700 deduction in benefits if you were making less than $50,000. And by the way, 38% of the people supported it. They voted on it anyway because look at me. That's an Italian expression. For those of you that are listening at home, I just flipped Joanna off with my chin. Okay, because that's what the politicians are doing. But, the best thing Donald Trump has going for him the last decade, Joanna, the Democrats, that's the best thing he's got going for him. They're scolds. They want to cancel everybody. They're righteous. They didn't want my help. I once worked for Donald Trump. How about opening the tent and redefining the party as a pro-democracy, pro-constitution party? No, we can't do that. We got to fight with each other and have litmus tests inside the party. I mean, and he laughs. My God, does he laugh at them? He thinks it's great. He's hoping Mondami wins by a landslide here in New York so that they can use Mondani's programs as a punching bag to further consolidate the hard right.
All right, so I want to come back to Mamdani, but before we do, let's talk about some of the people in his cabinet right now, because they're clearly going to be circling each other. They're already circling each other to succeed him. Pete Hegseth's speech to the generals last week felt like a platform that he was running on.
Yeah. He's too insecure of a guy, though. I mean, you're a good student of body language, and he's a good-looking guy. He's obviously in good physical shape, but he's a mental midget. I mean, he's just too insecure of a guy. He doesn't have the capability. He doesn't have the wealth of knowledge, the understanding of the American population, and he's got this overbite of forceful exaggeration. Or to quote Trump, what the hell is he doing with his hands? Too much hand movement.
Too much hand movement.
So Hegseth is out. Okay, go to the next one.
What about Marco Rubio?
No shot, because Marco Rubio is a weather vane. Okay, and Marco Rubio was once standing next to Jeb Bush and George W. Bush, and he was talking from a Republican Reagan-esque playbook, and now all of a sudden he's MAGA, and people look at him with great levels of disingenuousness. He doesn't have the ability. Remember, whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, this is what I stand for, and you create a coalition by standing for something. This was Hillary Clinton's problem. You can't be a Cub fan in Chicago and a Met fan or a Yankee fan in New York, because people know you're bullshitting them. They don't like it. Okay, and so Rubio, okay, that one's done. Okay, go to the next one.
What about J.D. Vance, who in 2016 was calling Trump Hitler?
So J.D. Vance looks very promising right now because he's in the lane. He just had dinner with Trump at the residence, the Naval Observatory, the vice president's residence, and he looks very promising right now. But he will implode. He will go into the Trump wood chipper. You ever seen Fargo, where they're putting the guy through that wood chipper?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what's going to happen to him because like William Shakespeare wrote about, the old guy does not want the new guy to replace him. Trump is such a nihilist that he'd actually like the Democrats to replace him. And people say, what are you talking about? No, he's right. Remember, the Republican Party is successful because Donald Trump, made it successful. Once he leaves the stage, he wants it to implode. That's what these people are like, I mean, that's their personalities, Remember, I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler, but in April of 1945, when they were sitting with Hitler, said, look, it's over. Hitler turned to his generals. Okay, Michael Beschloff wrote about this 20 years ago. Hitler turned to his generals and said, flood the coal mines and bring down the electrical grid in the urban areas. And they looked at him and said, what the hell are you talking about? He said, well, if we're not going to have a 1,000-year right that I'm running, I want the entire thing to cave.
Right.
Okay, so people are nuts. People are nuts.
So he's going to go scorched earth on the Republican Party rather than have anyone.
Then the fight's going to start. So anybody that Trump has read about that is a quote-unquote supposed successor to him, whose last name is not Trump, he will figure out a way to eviscerate over the next 36 months.